Great. So, I'm here to talk about not the latest trends in dashboard designs. I'm not going to tell you the beauty that you can have through long form or the aesthetic profiles of dark dashboards. I want to show you the most basic tips that I possibly can. And although Tableau is my favorite platform for dashboarding, this talk is not tailored for any specific software. I actually only mentioned Tableau again specifically a few times later in the presentation. The concepts here apply pretty much universally to any analytical platform. These are kind of things to consider and apply for as long as you continue building dashboards. So a quick look at our topics. After a brief introduction to Central and myself, we will talk through consideration of these three broad dashboard design concepts: inverted pyramid, intentional choices, prioritizing simplicity, and last I'll share some resources. So first, quick introduction to Central Garden and Pet. You're a market leader in the lawn and garden and pet industries. We bring to market dozens of brands, some of which you may have heard of before. Corporate headquarters is in Walnut Creek, California. I work in the garden segment, which is based here in Atlanta, and which represented about 2/5 of the company's revenue in our last fiscal year. As mentioned, I work for the garden segment. These are most of our major brands represented on screen here. Pet segment, KT, Nylabone, Four Paws, and Zilla are just a few of our pet brands you might recognize. So I encourage you to visit central.com to learn more about the company and our family of brands if you're interested. And a little bit about myself. I'm Brian Ellyson. You can find me on the Twitter and Tableau Public at BizGuyBri. I'll tell you right now, though, my portfolio has been, I've been out there a while to admire and learn from others' work, but haven't really taken the leap yet to grow my own public presence. Next month, I'll be celebrating 11 years with Central Garden and Pet, but I've got over 20 years diverse analytical experience in banking, retail, and consumer goods, across a variety of business functions, including marketing, sales, and executive support, finance, compensation, and operations. From the beginning, I've been keenly interested in things that make one report easier to understand than another, one chart more effective than another, or one analysis more compelling than another. Many of these things are considered universal best practices within the field of study called information design. Wikipedia defines information design as the practice of presenting information in a way that fosters an efficient and effective understanding of the information. But my real passion, the reason why I come to work every day, my two teenagers, Anna and Dylan, you can see us there on the right, enjoying the sunset from top of the Empire State Building a week before Christmas last year. And not only am I a Central Garden and Pet employee, I'm also a consumer. They're in the middle, see my garden, ready for the spring season this year. And on the left are my two cats, Ash and Cole. I love putting quotes into my presentations. I think so many people have said things better before. Well, I try to restate it. When it comes to information design, this is probably my favorite quote of all time on the screen. 8 words and it says it all. I really wasn't familiar with Hans Hofmann until finding this quote. If you're not familiar, he's a German-American painter regarded as one of the most influential art teachers of the 20th century. He established the first modern school of art anywhere. His work both preceded and influenced abstract expressionism, the first specifically American art movement to achieve international influence and put New York City at the center of the Western art world instead of Paris. Now, why am I starting with a quote from artist? Well, I know many of you are already aware of the secret link that exists between art and dashboards, and some of you may be surprised to learn what I'm about to share. So what is it that artists want to be understood? What is the one essential thing that all artists want to be understood of their work? What same thing do you and I want our dashboard viewers to understand? One basic element exists in all forms of art, from paintings to music and theater. That same element you will always find in a well-designed dashboard, and it's telling a story. Humans have been telling stories for thousands of years. There are many tried and true frameworks you can leverage to tell your stories. But for dashboards, I have found a majority of the time, one storytelling model works better than the rest. That is the inverted pyramid. Now, if you ever took Intro to Journalism or Mass Communications class, you probably learned about the inverted pyramid. It is the classic news story model. Key here is to know your audience so you can lay out the information in a way that is more interesting. And it breaks down like this. Basically, the headline or your summary is 100% of your audience. Those are the people who stop to read your article. And in the biz, they call this bottom line up front. You put the who, what, where, when, why up front, so people can walk away after reading that initial paragraph and get the main gist of the story. That's the headline, the summary. Let's say maybe 50% of your audience is more interested and they want to go on to read more important details about the story. And then maybe even a smaller section of your audience is additionally curious and they want to go on to explore more details of the story, background information, such. That's how the inverted pyramid breaks down. And I mentioned here, key is to know your audience. So we know what information is considered most newsworthy versus backup details and background information. Well, it just so happens that the same exact framework works perfectly for dashboard design as it does for news stories. And again, here, key is to know your audience. So we put the most important info up front. This is the most noteworthy information. Here you have no more than 5 to 10 seconds to get your audience to understanding. This is where emphasis plays a key. Now we like put a lot of stuff in charts on dashboards, but sometimes you can put your KPIs in text for maximum attention because that's going to give your reader a cue to stop and read something that's important. And I've got the text capitalized and in bold there to signify they can put KPIs in a band or a big aggregate number, as you would call them. Next, you have details, your secondary information, charts highlighting your most relevant trends and breakouts. This is where you can help build your flow to have the reader know that these are backup details, any kind of time frame breakouts or business units breakouts they want to give. And then tertiary information, this is for people who want to drill down further and explore, product managers to see how their individual product is doing, or sales managers drilling down to a sales territory. Putting this tertiary information 1 or 2 clicks away can help obscure your headlines, or you can actually put some of this information in tooltips as well. Key here is prioritizing and arranging metrics logically. Moving on to the next quote. Edward Tuffy, also known as E.T., is the sagely prophet who, in the early 80s, captured and condensed some of the most important foundational concepts on effectively displaying quantitative information. Tuffy is responsible for introducing several data visualization innovations, including the Sparkline and small multiple. Both were designed to help the viewer understand a large amount of data by maximizing data to ink ratio, one of his most key concepts. Basically boils down like this. The proportion of ink that is used to present actual data compared to the total amount of ink or pixels used into the entire display. Basically, don't put a bunch of ink out there that isn't portraying data. This quote speaks to me because I think many times the failure of design is that it simply isn't considered. And if you don't intentionally consider design, your information does risk being confused and cluttered. So this takes me to the tip of making intentional choices. Now, even if you're working with a software program that is designed to consider best practices, default options usually need tweaks. Don't expect default options to tell your story best. Things like color, value, precision, fonts, and grid lines can make a difference. Become familiar and implement best practices. When I think of best practices, I think of 3 groups: cardinal rules, design guidelines, and stylistic preferences. Cardinal rules are things that, for the most part, you generally do not want to break these rules. Things like limited exception line charts are only used for time series data, or don't truncate the x-axis of a bar chart. Those are cardinal rules. Design guidelines are things like, what's the limit on how many widgets to put on a dashboard? Somewhere between 5 and 7. How many lines you want on a line chart? Somewhere around 4 or 5. Those are more kind of guidelines. You could stretch them if you need to. And the last is stylistic preferences. These are things like font choices, color choices, and spacing. These are more things about preference, what kind of style you develop over time. And to help direct your reader's emphasis, what what should get their attention in the flow or how the user should ingest your dashboard, keep in mind these three practices. So for visual purposes, use the best chart types. You will get more mileage from effective use of bars and lines than you will from concepts like packed bubbles and tree maps. Layout, you want to usually follow left to right, top to bottom. F or Z flow is most common. And be sure that you're grouping or related or relevant data so your users' eyes are not bouncing all around the page. And lastly, use text sparingly. Titles, tables, legends, labels, axes, and headings all add to your user's cognitive load. So you want to think about optimizing your data to ink ratio and leveraging things like a dual purpose title, right? You can include a color legend within the title. And something that I've noticed occurs regularly is be mindful of value precision. Keep in mind, do you need 1 decimal point, 2 decimal points? Especially on an axis, if your axis is showing a number like 40%, 50%, 60%, there is no need to have a 40.0%, 50.0% on the axis. Those small differences can really make a difference in your cognitive load. And third quote here, this one's a little bit longer. This is a Danish designer who is known for his way-showing designs at several European airports. He's also responsible for coming up with the phrase way-showing. And he's also known for his emphasis on simplicity in design. Several good words in this quote, some repeated roots. We got design, explain, inform. Knowledge and action are especially important within a business context. And I'm also going to key on the phrase right there in the middle, facts of the universe. What does that even mean? Well, for design to airports, so let's think about the airport. Think about you're traveling on an air journey. What do you need to know at each stage of your travel? Think about there's a different universe depending on where you are in your journey and your individual needs. When you show up to the airport, right, you don't care where your ground transportation is necessary, right? You already got there. You probably either want to get your ticket if you haven't already, check your bags, or go to security. There's really only a few options that you have available to you. And when you arrive, it depends on, do you have a connecting flight? Do you need to know where your next gate is? Are you leaving the airport? Do you know where ground transportation is? So there's a limited amount of choices to you along the way, so that minimizes your universe as you're on your journey. So the context here for a dashboard design and prioritizing simplicity is keeping in mind what is that universe. And for dashboard, the universe is what question are you answering? Every good dashboard is designed to answer a question. And it's a fine balance to provide the user's context without including too much. So constantly ask yourself, what other information do users need? The goal is simplicity, embracing the concept of less is more, and best practice is usually to reduce if possible, and always making sure that you're using the right format. Is a chart better versus a table, etc. And there's essentially 3 types of dashboards that you can create. Strategic dashboards track KPIs or key performance indicators. Analytical dashboards process data to identify trends. And operational dashboards tell you what is happening now. And if you try to cross streams between these 3, that's when you can get into a little bit of trouble and have, some people call it a kitchen sink dashboard. It's everything thrown in there. So focus on what question you're trying to answer and what type of dashboard is it that you're building, strategic, analytical, or operational. Lastly, I'll close with a few resources. As I mentioned, let's say Tableau again a few times. One of the best resources I've found is the Tableau community, whether you're talking about Tableau user groups or finding inspirational work out on Tableau Public. The entire Tableau community is a great resource for dashboard design. And I've got a few books listed here. Big fan of books, although there's a lot of material out on the web. I feel that published, peer-reviewed, hard copy book. It offers a lot more solid advice sometimes than a fly-by-night kind of blog. But these are a few of my favorites up here. None of these books are specific to any particular software, but I've got Tuffy mentioned again. I probably consider him the godfather of data visualization. He's published this and several subsequently beautifully done books. Shown here was that first one to really pull together what works well universally into one reference material. Stephen Few, also another innovator, he introduced the bullet graph and has also published several great books, including 2 editions of the one I've got listed here. And lastly, Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflic, Storytelling with Data. That book focuses entirely on best practices for presenting data to tell stories. It shares an excellent understanding of why good visualizations matter so much and how to use them to tell compelling stories that demand action. And she also published a workbook to accompany the main volume. And if nothing else, you can do a quick search on dashboard design principles and find an never-ending list of blogs or videos that can help guide you on the way. And that's all I had from my presentation today. So with that, I'll say thank you and open it back to the floor.
That was awesome.
Thank you, Brian.
I feel like there were tons of like just really good practical pieces in there.
And I love the resources at the end because I've read several of those books and found them really useful myself. And I feel like people are always looking for like what books to read, what like podcasts to listen to. You pick up a lot just looking at what other people have done and suggestions people have. So
yeah, absolutely. And if anybody ever has a chance to meet Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflic, she's phenomenal. The other 2 are not as good in person, but she's fantastic.
Right. Yeah, one of those 2 can be critical with feedback, I think. Right.
I think they can both be fairly critical. But yes,
right.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions for Brian? I'm looking at the Q&A. If not, no big deal.
Brian, I'm curious, as you've gone through your own journey, I mean, you mentioned you've kind of been in this game for close to 20 years. Like, how have you seen your own career progress? You know, leveraging these best practices. I assume part of it too is like, as you've grown in your career, the audience that you're designing for and creating for kind of continues to ramp itself up. So I'm curious if you have any kind of thoughts on kind of the career progression, then also like designing for different audiences.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I was doing a little bit of reminiscing the other night and thinking about what my first real like reporting overhaul project was, and it was when I worked at Circuit City Stores. If you remember that company, I was actually worked in the stores, and then went to the corporate headquarters, and I took over a reporting task from someone who had been building something in Microsoft Access and was printing it out on PDFs and mailing them manually to every single store. After 1 month of doing that, I was like, I'm not going to do that anymore. So I built, kind of an automated process to bring in the data and found a way to feed it to the stores automatically so they could, get it printed out on a dot matrix printer, which was, kind of still old technology at the time, but it challenged me to take that same information and put it into a way that I could put it into this antiquated format that was going to read better, get the information to the people's hands quicker, right? Because that's something I could refresh and update and send automatically on a weekly basis versus having to go through this whole antiquated process that took 2 weeks or whatever once a month. So it really kind of opened my eyes to how data in the hands of the people that need it quickly in a format that makes sense to them and can make a difference. And everything really did just snowball from there in my career progression. And things have changed so much since then. I mean, talk about trying to force an access report into a dot matrix printer now to building viz and tooltips kind of stuff. it's really fun to look back and see how far things have progressed. But yeah, the user audience has definitely become more sophisticated along the way as well, and demanding even quicker information, even more actionable insights. So it's just you tightened up the whole beginning to end spectrum from when the data gets registered when you're putting into use for business purposes.